Welcome to In the Now with Jim Swilley with our special guest, Zach Keough. Would you please welcome Zach? Uh, Zach has he's had 24 years of active service in the Army, and that's actually how we thank you for your service to our country. Go Army. We actually met because when you were stationed somewhere, you started watching the TV show when I was at Church in the Now.
I did.
You were stationed in Alabama, right?
No, it was Louisiana, as a matter of fact.
And he would drive all the way from Louisiana to Conyers. And then you got deployed. You were in Iraq.
I was in Iraq, and about a few months before I was scheduled to redeploy, I had received orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia. And I said, well, I'm going to Metron every weekend, or at least as often as I could, and that's exactly as I intended. That's what I did.
And you streamed when you were in Iraq also.
Iraq and Afghanistan.
And then he got stationed in Hawaii. He'd been everywhere, man. And he would stream Metron there. And now you guys are in
Kansas City.
And he still comes in. You know, he's part of our cyber congregation. He came in for our first anniversary. He came in for my 60th birthday. And so he let me know that he was going to be here again. I said, well, next time you're here, let's do some In the Now, because it's not just because we have a friendship and we have some, we share an affinity for the Beatles. He sends me constant stream of Beatles stuff. But also, he really has great revelation. And I guess we're coming up on 20 years of knowing each other now. It's hard to believe.
It's getting there.
And that we've always had a really good, there's just some people that you think, that guy knows some stuff. And he also says some things that, you remember when Mary and Elizabeth saluted one another and the baby in the womb leapt? Your revelation is like your baby. And when there's somebody who speaks to you and their iron sharpens your iron and their deep calls into your deep, I always make a mental note of that because those people in my life are very valuable. And what I actually want to talk about we're going to do, this is part one, we'll do 3 parts to this. Zach is working on translation of the scriptures, and he started with the epistle of 1 John. And so I have a great respect for that. I've done, how many times have you heard me tell this? My original plan was to do the whole Bible. I was going to do Bible in the Now. I don't know if you know, there's 66 books. I got into it. I thought, oh, Lord, this is a lot. So I narrowed it down to, Jesus is really what matters. So why don't we do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? And then I got into that. I thought, well, really, the Gospel of John pretty much says everything. But I was able to finally do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it does, when he told me he was doing this and he sent me a PDF, let me read some of the stuff he was writing. I told him, I said, it's going to change you. When you do this verse by verse, it takes meditation of the scriptures to a much deeper level. Zach is working on he comes from a family of chiropractors, but he's also working on a degree in holistic healing and alternative medicine. So his revelation is very connected to the physical. There's things that I bounce off Dr. Sheila because as a healer and a chiropractor, she sort of sometimes will give me the other side to a spiritual thing. Sometimes when Stephen and I are working out, we'll talk about the connection of spirit and body. And I definitely had this with Zach. Why did you choose 1 John? Why was that what you wanted to go with?
So John is really very interesting because in microcosm, the essence of his gospel or his letters is love. Essentially, that's what that is. And love, and I know you all know this, is really the language of the universe. And I think what I find disturbing most, at least up until this point in my life, and is that there's this idea that there's this dichotomous view of spirituality / religion and science, when in fact they're really saying the same thing. Absolutely. And as Dr. Joe Dispenza had alluded, it really comes down to demystifying that, right? And really say, hey, we're kind of really saying the same thing, but because John not a very educated, if at all educated person, had a very limited lexicon to convey his message. And throughout his letters, it seems like he's saying the same thing, but I disagree. I think he's trying to convey something different. But within all that, I think that the language that we have now, really we can utilize that jargon, those terminology, the diction and the parlance, if you will, to expand on that and really kind of say, hey, we're really saying the same thing or seeing the same thing here, essentially.
I'm going to show you 7 verses of what he's worked on so far, and I love Bible translation, and I love, you know how when somebody says, which Bible do you use? I'm thinking, well, you must not have ever heard me, because in one sermon I refer to 5 or 6 easily, sometimes more. That's why I thank God for there's stuff online now. Can you imagine if you had to bring in, what's he going to use? Oh, it's in the Amplified now. But I like, if there's a thought I want to connect with, I'll go through different translations, and I want to see how did this guy hear it? Some people say, well, is that okay? Yeah, it's okay. That's all translations are that. And some of the title for this little 3-part series we're doing came from a phrase that you used, I believe, in verse 5. But let me just show you. Here's 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Do you have a name for this, or is this just a work in progress?
So for the time being, I'm titling this Reimagining John, John Relativity Speaking, because this is not like anything that I've seen before. I'm reimagining this scripture, but from a context used with what we now refer to as quantum science, right? When you're talking self-directed neuroplasticity and those types of terminology, that's the terminology that I'm using, because I'm appealing to a specific audience who's familiar with those words. And when they read those words, they're saying, wow, okay, I get it now. I understand what maybe he was saying, if indeed your translation is on point, and I believe it is, right? So that's why I've used...
I just noticed that you're wearing a John Lennon T-shirt that
Yes,
says love on
I
it. How is that for appropriate?
I intended to grab my St. John T-shirt, but I grabbed the wrong John. It said love at the bottom, and well, anyway.
That's what I call theme. Verse 1 is that primordial phenomenon which we perceived and realized with our faculties. The enigma that we now profess to understand derives from an intangible source of frequency used to create a nurturing, life-giving, and harmonious environment. Wow. I already like this. See? Yes. Verse 2. This frequency brings about awareness. We perceive its life-altering abilities, and now we attempt to disclose the logistics of these energetic signatures through mindfulness, which resides in a non-local resource, yet it remains immediately available to us. Come on, Jesus. Verse 3. We share with you our personal firsthand experience based on an acoustic and visual evidence. That's good. Hoping that our experience piques your interest enough to engage in further dialogue and inquiry into this phenomenon. The fellowship between us is divinely inspiring and evokes a spirit reminiscent of Jesus the Christ. You didn't learn that in the Army. You got that somewhere else.
No, I didn't learn that in the Army.
They didn't teach that in the Army, Sonia?
That is not Army jargon, by the way.
Verse 4, we compose this small piece of literature, not in prose form, but so that it appeals to your intellect, inspires and forms an energetic template with the intent to produce healing and restoration from within. I like this a lot. And that's our title for this 3-part series, is Healing and Restoration from Within. Everything I've been teaching you for the last however long has been, everything that you need is inside you. It's not external. Even your ideas of heaven and everything, it's not out there somewhere on the other side of the Milky Way. Everything that you need, actually everything that you need, you already have. Let me go ahead and read the rest of this, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 5. This is the message which we received and now relay to you when we elevated our consciousness. Goodness is ubiquitous. Every thought is exposed as an illusion connected with the past and future, derailing our ability to attain a coherent mind and body. I think in the King James, that's where it says, in him is light and there's no darkness at all, I believe. And then finally, no, let's do verse 6 and 7. It says, should we profess to engaging regularly a mindfulness approach to life, yet permit these damning illusions of our past and future to dictate our thinking pattern? What? We deceive ourselves and are unable to experience an altruistic approach to life. What?
You should read the rest of it.
At verse 7, but should we continue our pursuit in attaining a coherent mind and body, a consistent form of enlightenment, we engage delightfully and gleefully in each other's conversation about our experiences in oneness. In this manner, Jesus' courageous act is not in vain, because his words resonate with us even unto this day, dispelling any and all misperceptions we conceived of ourselves and of others. All right, so if I just said to you, what did you just say in those 7 verses? Paraphrase it for me. What is John saying through you?
Wow. So let me give you a backdrop and a little bit of historical perspective on John. Not that I need to, but I feel it's necessary to recap to kind of give you an idea where I think he's coming from in these particular letters. John, somewhere in this particular letter, not in these passages, but a little bit further down the road, he says something. He says, no man has ever seen God. We've not seen him with our own eyes. But yet you just said in your incipit, we have perceived him with our own faculties, more or less, as my translation goes. So what is it? Have you seen him or have you not? What I think John was conveying is, because you have to bear in mind, he was part of the triumvirate in Jerusalem, which is James, Peter, and John. James being the half-brother of Jesus. Neither one of those or any of those 3 persons believed that he was God incarnate.
Yeah, that's right.
They believed he was a Messiah, but Messiah is not synonymous with God. It's something entirely different. They did believe that he was sent. He was a chosen one that was sent to deliver the Israelites from the tyranny of Roman rule. They did believe that, but they didn't believe he was God. That didn't come about later until Paul came about with this theology. And by the way, Paul's conversion and his ministry was about 10 years after Jesus' ministry. He never met the guy. He learned about him. He had a revelation about him, but he never met him. In totally different perspective. And that's why you see throughout the scriptures, if you really study it, there is this bit of, I don't want to say animosity or enmity, but there is a bit of a tangle there, if you will, between the triumvirate, Peter, James, and John, and Paul. They're going back and forth. In fact, in James' letter, he's saying, hey, he says, it's like looking at yourself in a mirror and forgetting who you are. You know who he's talking about? Paul. Did you forget you were a Hebrew? Honestly? You've just done away with the law entirely, and now you're abandoning that for this? That's, in James' mind, there was a balance between the law and spirituality. And I think, along the lines with John, again, the essence of John's letter is love. It's the language of the universe. And I think with John specifically, there's clarity in this, but you kind of miss that if you glean over the scriptures and you're just seeing the same verbiage and words over and over. And you're absolutely right. When you reimagine in these scriptures, you're thinking, wait a second, this takes on a whole new meaning. And it took me about 3 weeks to come up with just the first chapter. And I'm finishing up chapter 5 right now. But I've got to do some more, meditating.
It's overwhelming. I would
Yeah.
reach a saturation point where I think I've got to put this down because there's no way to articulate what it does to you. It's different than reading it. When you are writing, I think it'd be a good exercise sometime for us to just try a verse and just do a creative writing assignment and say, here's this verse, you put it in your words and see, and you'll be amazed that you know things you didn't know you knew. Go ahead.
Yeah, so going on with, and I'm going to kind of refer to some latter parts of his letter too, with regard to this here. when he talks about love, and I was just listening to Dr. Joe Dispenza last night, when we have that elevated sense of love, if you will, it's an energy, it's emotion, really is what it is. It compels us to want to give. That's why I talked about the altruistic approach to life. And it's just that innate desire to want to do that. We have a connection, or we establish a connection with humanity. We're aware of those in our surroundings. No longer do we pass by and just, okay, life is going about, and I'm passing all these people and opportunities and things of sort. I am seeing things now differently than I have previously. There was a play that was written by a guy, Meredith Wilson, in 1957.
He wrote The Music Man.
The Music Man, right? And it was a play, and I think in '59 they actually did a movie about it. And Robert Preston and Shirley Jones, love-struck Shirley Jones, and
76 trombones.
There you go. And in I want to say actually in '59, Anita Bryant sang this song. It's called "Till There Was You." And the Beatles actually sang this song in '63. They did their version of it, and the songs are the words are very profound because it speaks to this particular. I want to say not just this passage here, but it speaks to what I'm saying to you in a sense where help me out.
There were bells ringing, but I never heard them ringing.
I never heard them ringing. There was love all around. But I never heard it singing. No, I never heard it at all till there was you.
Oh, Lord, I know he's going to sing too.
There's that sense of love that allows me. It's the fulcrum, if you will, that compels me to see things differently than I would because it's an elevated state of energy. It's called love. And when I reach that state, scientifically speaking, I'm in the brainwave pattern. I'm in a theta state, right? And when your theta state and your beta state cohere, you're on an alpha state, and that alpha state is really kind of an ideal state to be in, and that's the state you want to be in to see things as they are.
Hold that thought. Yep. Hold that thought right there. That's good. We're going to put a comma right here and take it up in part 2. Thank you for being with us on In the Now with Jim Swilley. We'll see you next time. Mwah.
How are you feeling?